Hello, my name's Amanda Foxon-Hill and this is Suddenly Autistic. It's a video diary where I am talking about how I'm coming to terms with being diagnosed as autistic and having ADHD as a late diagnosed person. To be in your 40s and find out something like this, which is fundamental to the way that you take in, process and then spit out information, is huge, to be honest. I make these videos to share my journey, and I have to be honest and say that there's been many times throughout me doing this so far when I've gone, what on earth am I doing? Why on earth am I doing this? Who would want to listen to me, and why? What is the point? Even though I'm a teacher, I am actually qualified to teach, and not necessarily on autism, but that's just in general in science. I didn't want to make video content from a teaching only perspective. It was an impulse, if I'm honest. It's the impulsiveness of probably, let's not blame ADHD, but I was being impulsive when I was like, oh, let's share this. I wanted to help. I wanted to connect. Life is hard. Every single day, life is bloody difficult. Anything I can share on here about the reality of life, the hope, the fears, the reality, how it feels, even to in the vague attempt to connect with others. I wanted to just stand up and bear witness to me as I navigate this world as a dysfunctional person. And I say that with a little laugh because I feel it. In this video, I'm actually going to talk about grief because one of our family members has passed away. It shakes everything up, and then the cards fall as they will. Throughout the last couple of weeks of taking some time and processing what's happened so far, there's been some aha moments for me, and a lot of that has been around who am I, what is the point, what am I doing this for, what are we doing anything for? The process of this person who I talk about passing has meant that I have been spending a lot of time curating or pulling together and cataloguing some of their affairs, some of the things that they've kept, and putting them in order and trying to create a narrative and do that in a way that really honours who they were and who they wanted to be, as opposed to who they were in relation to me and who I might have wanted them to become. That has led me to think about life, identity, who am I, who is anybody. I wouldn't say it's led me into an existential crisis because I don't actually have a problem with the pointlessness of life, with there being no greater purpose. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of beauty in being alive, and the purpose is in the doing. Stage 1, life after death. And I've had to take my glasses off because I've got to that point in eyesight where I can't read with them on and I can't really see clearly with them off. So it's like, ooh, let's just do this. I'm reading this because it's emotional, and it's easier for me to stay on track if I'm reading emotional stuff. So stage 1, life after death. Brian was my father-in-law. My husband's an only child, so Brian was our person. Totally, in that regard. Brian lived with us for 18 years, and before that, when we were getting together in our relationship, we sort of lived between his house and my dad's house. There's only been a handful of years when my husband hasn't lived with his father in one way or another. We've also holidayed with Brian and accommodated his partners and situations and whatever. So definitely his life and our life overlap much more than in some cases. So there's a lot of water gone under this bridge. After hyper-focusing on Brian's health for so long, I could tell that he didn't have much time left. I noticed a few times in the last month of life that he appeared to be actively dying, although he would then rally a little bit before crashing a bit more, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. All of this time, neither Brian or any health professional confirmed this. Now, I understand the delicate position of everyone is in when something as unpredictable as death is in the picture. But Brian had a known life-limiting health condition that we were managing. He had been ill for 3 years. He had been sort of looked after or looked out for, I would say, by us for that whole 3 years. Before that, it had been more of a shared care arrangement, I guess, between us, his wider family, Brian's wider family, and his partner and his partner's family. His partner ended up with dementia, and after being put into a care home, and she's doing well, Brian came back and started to rely on us more heavily. So that's been the last 3 and a bit years. I knew he was elderly and getting frail, and yet he was still being sent for investigative scans up until the last day of his life. What on earth for? This to me seemed like a huge waste of time and money and comfort and energy from my perspective, not least because it perpetuated the delusion that Brian was in around him being able to live independently of any formal help at home, and thus leaving us with no access to palliative care or team support. Brian had all of his marbles. He's an intelligent chap, so he was able to say the right things, he was able to communicate, and he was very adamant that he wanted to maintain his independence and dignity, live at home, die at home, and have death no time soon. Thank you very much. And who are we to argue? I mean, there's nothing wrong with wanting that for yourself. So I'm here living in this reality where I'm seeing someone decline and getting quite vulnerable, and Brian's in another. The health professionals are in a third realm, which is neither mine or his, as they are trying to protect their patient, Brian, and respect his wishes, while seeing the difficulties that it was placing us in terms of emotional pain and turmoil and risk, actually risk. I found this all very hard to accept, as it triggered my trauma of being unheard, unsupportive, misunderstood, invisible even, and it also impacted my ability to function. The lack of functionality in me was then manifesting as struggling, taking longer to do my work, not able to do my work, being shut down quite a bit. This then triggered feelings of injustice and even fatalism. What's the point in life? This is all bullshit. Life is crap. Why is nobody helping us? You know, being really abandoned. So I really did feel abandoned at times. Now, I wanted to share that with you to give you a little bit of context into how I was feeling, because I think it's really important to know that these times of grief is a complex process. And actually, for me, I was grieving before Brian died. So I had a thing called anticipatory grief, and that's common with people with terminal illness. It's also quite common when you have elderly relatives that you are assuming some care for, and especially when that care gradually creeps up and there's not really an explicit agreement to that. It's just you start doing a little bit, then you do a little bit more. Now that, as someone who's autistic and who had explicitly said to our person, to Brian, that I cannot nurse you, I cannot look after myself, I have anxiety, I have these problems, I'm not using that as an excuse. I literally struggle to cook, clean, look after myself. There is no way I can do that for someone else. I'm also very clumsy. I won't manage to do things for you in a safe way. We need help. But then have that rejected. It's a difficult pill to swallow, and we carried on. And that was my reality. It wasn't that I didn't want to, I couldn't do it. And it's not that I'm being harsh on myself. This is reality. I'm happy with my reality. I was extremely ready to get help. I had to respect Brian's desire not to get help, and that caused me a lot of problems, and I had to deal with that. And then in dealing with that, I learned quite a bit about myself, both as someone in general and as where the autism played in, really, and where that was both protective and a risk factor. Grief is a process. It's a unique, individualized process. There's emotional responses, which are in your body, felt responses to the loss of someone or something that was important. And it's important, I found, because as someone who's autistic, I was thinking, well, grief means crying. Grief means wailing. No, it doesn't. Those crying and having very sad feelings are part of grief. They're not the only part, and they don't necessarily manifest that way for everybody. Grief is individualized. We all feel it differently. There are some commonalities, but we feel it in different times in different ways. As somebody who's autistic, now I know, so I can be mindful of that. But before, I would have been very judgmental of how I grieve, thinking that it wasn't good enough or wasn't the same or it was somehow disrespectful. It's not. The way I grieve is individual to me and it makes sense to me, and that's important. So, grief is a bag of emotional responses and these are triggered by the finality of that loss and the realization that your position in life has changed, and with that, potentially your self concept, which could have been shaken. Physical manifestations of the emotions of grief can be fatigue. You can feel very physically heavy and tired, and that's exactly how we all felt. I have a picture of the three of us on the floor outside on the Sunday after Brian passed. He passed away on the Saturday. So on the Sunday, we're all just lying around, literally struggling to hold our own body weight. Um, Brain aches, brain fog, sorry, ache, numbness, dissociation, even, and physical pain. So, along with this feeling of heaviness, I also was experiencing, as my other family members have verbalized, a feeling of derealization, like the world has floated a little bit further away and that we're somehow suspended and both weightless and heavy at the same time. It's quite an odd feeling. They're emotions, that's emotions. There can also be, as a manifestation of the grief emotional state, changes in appetite, sleep disturbances, lower immunity, so a greater potential risk to get sick, and even changes in sex drive, which are all understandable when you consider the relational element of grief and what that means, and you know just how it changes everything. So emotions are the physical symptoms, the symptomatic element of grief, but there's also feelings. And I think, as someone who's autistic, feelings and emotions have always been quite complicated for me to verbalize and articulate, because we tend to use, and I probably will in this video, we tend to say it feels like this as a feeling, when actually that what we feel in our body is an emotion. The feelings come from our concept, from a psychosomatic. So, psychosomatic is where we interpret the sensations in our body in an intellectual way, so we make sense of them. So, we might have a tummy ache, and then we look out for other symptoms and we think, oh, that is, I'm feeling anxious, or I have a stomach bug, or I am just tired, or I ate something I'm sensitive to. So the feelings are the interpretation, the emotions are the physical. But like I said, in the English language especially, we tend to say, I've got a feeling, I've got a gut feeling, when actually that's an emotion. So our emotional response happens. We have these sensations, that is being emotional. Then sometimes they spill out of us as different feelings, and they can be anger, fear related, sadness related, or surprise. So, surprise in relation to grief could be disillusioned, confused, shocked, perplexed, overwhelmed. It could be that the passing of your person was sudden and unexpected, and that would put you in a great sense of shock. But for us, for me in particular, there was no surprise that this was happening, although it was a surprise at the exact time, because nobody ever knows exactly when something's going to happen unless you turn off a machine or whatever. But it was more a sense of being confused because of the messages around Brian in the last couple of days of his life when he was in hospital at that point, and then the reality that how quickly he passed away after, once we'd all got on the same page, I guess. Anger, those sort of lots of, feeling a bit irritated, agitated, annoyed, and frustrated. These are typical feelings. This is how we might manifest those emotional states within our body. And then there's also fear, which is where the anxiety comes in. And for me, this resonates with me quite strongly, very strongly, because I have an anxiety prone personality, I guess, just by nature of who I am. The fact that it's disordered now is a little bit extra. And then obviously the inevitable sadness, and along with that can come things like guilt and shame. There's one of the great things about for me, having lived with and done the best I could for Brian over the last 3 and a bit years is there is no feeling of guilt or shame around what we've done. Where I have felt shame is in the anticipatory grief. So I learnt in the last 3 to 6 months of Brian's life to relax myself a little around my anticipatory anxiety of him knowing me thinking he's going to pass. I literally had got to the state where I'd hyper focus so much that I felt like every morning he was going to be dead in his bed or I'd find him dead, and how was I going to manage that? So that went on for a long time, and then I finally got to the point where I was like, wow, I've got to deal with this because this is draining me. So in the last 3 to 6 months-ish of Brian's life, I was a little more relaxed about that, a little more accepting of that anxiety. And I did protect myself a little from him by changing some of the behaviours that I'd done and putting in some more boundaries and being a little bit more honest with myself and my capacity, and then basically telling him that. So having those discussions with the family and with him, so that I could offer support and be present in an authentic way that was basically not killing me or not putting me at the heightened level that I was. Because if I'm dysfunctional, I'm not going to be any help to him anyway. I had to accept that he was the kind of person that was not going to accept any outside help, because he was actually in denial. He was in a form of denial about his health. And it doesn't matter what objective reality there was in terms of, doctors' reports, blood samples, kidney function, etc. That was really informative for me and was giving me a good idea of where he was at in the scheme of things. For him, it was just not registering. He didn't want to know. He didn't find it interesting. He didn't feel like it related to him. And I had to learn to accept both that truth, that it was real for me and not important for him. I was uncomfortable about this and I had to make some peace with that, and that was not easy. And I did go to counselling and whatnot, and there was various things that were helpful and not helpful. It's quite a long process. Essentially, it was me unpicking and spending a lot of time unpicking all of my thoughts and feelings. One of the things that was a little bit of a trigger was seeing how hard it was for him to be, well, how hard he was finding it to look after himself. So living with a layer of discomfort around all these things, but I had already, in terms of things like the housework and the food, some of the things I struggle with as me individually, part of my autism and ADHD and just general character and trauma, I think, is self-care. So I'm not too bad at things like cleaning. In fact, I do what I call trauma cleaning or emotional cleaning. So I tend to have a very clean house when the shit's hitting the fan, because I clean to get my energy out. But in terms of cooking, meal prep, choosing good options, really not good. I let that slip. So self-care in that way is not the best for me. It's not the easiest for me. A compromise, something that I was happy with, is occasionally when I have managed to cook something, or when I did manage to cook something good, he'd be invited in for a meal with us, and that happened maybe once every week or so. He'd come in. We'd also take him out with us when we went out, whether it be lunchtime or whatever. So there was that as a compromise. We would sometimes get meals, like ready meals and something from the shops if he wasn't able to get out. So it wasn't an abandonment, it was a boundary. So there was a boundary that I was honest about, but I still felt uncomfortable. So I wanted to share that because I feel like, especially with being autistic, there can be an all or nothing mentality. I have to do all of this for someone, or I can't do any of it. There was a middle way. And there was natural consequences for Brian of not accepting help. So we didn't deny him the opportunity to have more help. We were just saying that these are our boundaries. This is what we can do. If there's a gap and you're still feeling like you can't look after yourself and you need help, then we have to get that externally. And that was the case for all of these things. It was difficult. And there was a lot of anxiety around all these things. What I wanted to get across there is that, yeah, there are consequences to being true to your boundaries and yourself, and the other person not picking up. Just because I decided that I wasn't going to do something didn't mean that Brian would go, oh, okay, then I'll get help. He didn't. So it was still, the problems were there and they got bigger. It was more, we have to learn to let that go. That is a consequence of his choice. He made the choice as a free person, which is what he wanted. There are a few defense mechanisms that people go into in the grieving process that I wanted to comment on from my neurodiverse perspective. So, one of them is denial. So, not being ready or wanting to accept the reality and the finality of the situation or see it as it objectively is. I think this is coming from my autism and my objective reality, my desire for verifiable facts and truths in a broad scope of the word. I know that truth is subjective and there can be more than one, but what I'm talking about is evidence. So I look for evidence, like I was looking for evidence of where Brian is in his life trajectory through the medical tests. Some people will use denial. They won't look at the evidence, they won't go for the tests, they will interpret them a different way, they'll see them, whatever. I tend, and I think this is part of my autism, I tend to have what I'd say is a boundless acceptance, so no boundaries. So I will, instead of denying the reality, I will basically use the data at hand to think up all the scenarios in which the next step might play out. So I might end up with 20 different scenarios that I have to process, which then can be overwhelming. So it's kind of like the opposite of denial, really. It's like multiple realities from here, which one is more likely, and then ranking them statistically. I guess that's what I do. Then there's bargaining, making deals with yourself with an underlying notion that you have or can summon the power to change the outcomes, either for yourself or others. This is quite a common Western way of thinking, I think, where it's like goal orientated behavior, fake it until you make it. It's a mind tool where you are really feeling quite powerful within yourself and that you can use that to motivate yourself to a better outcome. I don't want to say that that's all delusional because there's a lot of truth in that bargaining that, that positive self talk and pep talking and visualizing a future. There's a lot to be said about that. But there are some situations where that is not helpful and not really necessary, especially when it's used as the only or a main defense mechanism from your emotions, from your inner world. I can't access this at all. I can't do this at all. I just don't even understand how anyone else can, although I accept that they can. I find it hard to even get control of my own brain, know how I'm going to show up mentally every day, let alone making deals with myself to fake it till I make it. So that manifests to me as getting stuck in a moment and almost being the opposite of making deals to avoid the thing. I tend to go into the emotions too much. Then there's emotional insulation, blocking things out, pushing them away, swallowing it down, being a rock. Again, I tend to become overwhelmed and mostly overwhelmed because I can have feelings in my body and not understand them. It takes me a while to get to grips with what's actually going on. And because I have a low reception for body sensations. You could say a high pain threshold, but it's not really that simple, and it's not always that I have a high pain threshold. I just have a low connection to my body naturally. That when I do get the signals, it's usually because they're quite high. So I tend to then be overwhelmed. So I don't pick up on the early warning signs. I only get the message from my body when things are urgent, and then it's actually quite high, quite a lot. So I kind of have the opposite of that. I don't block things out. I naturally don't see them until they're too big. So it can look like being a rock for others, and then I get a little bit upset and frustrated that people might think that I'm doing that when actually I can't keep myself safe. I don't have access to the information that they do. I don't have a choice. There's also reaction formation, which is where people show the opposite emotion to what they're feeling. So that might manifest as like a bit of a toxic positivity. It's like, oh, keep on smiling, and that again, it's a bit of a fake it till you make it sort of thing, or flicking to focus on the good side. But then it's judging reactions. I can't do that. But sometimes throughout this last process, I find myself getting a little bit frustrated because my healthy processing can sometimes be misinterpreted by others as this trying to put on a brave face when it's not. It just might be that I have processed some aspect of my grief faster than other people, or I have less attachment to something than other people. I'm like less sentimental or whatever, but I'm more something else. So I can be happy and share great memories about something quite soon after someone passing, or I can be quite realistic about it when other people are still stuck in that overwhelming soup of not knowing what they're feeling. There's a few more. There's displacement, there's fantasy, there's repression, and then there's sublimation. Sublimation is the one that we aim for really, which is where we channel any negative thoughts and emotions into a positive outcome. For me, I think making videos like this and trying to put a bit of narrative around how grief is intersecting with my neurodiversity is a way of sublimation. It's a way of making sense of and bringing some positive or some worth to the experiences, things that I'm going through. The extra layer of difficulty for me as a neurodiverse person was my relationship with grief was different before he died. I noticed that the other family members seemed much, while everybody kind of knew this was coming, there was a greater ability by everyone pretty much to get on with their lives and think about it sometimes, usually when there was a crisis. For me, the difficulty was I couldn't get out of that tunnel. I became hyperfixated on Brian. That's not just because of my neurodiversity, but I do feel that that strengthened that response. Then, as soon as he did pass, there was just the reality of sitting with Brian after his passed and before they took him down to the morgue. The emotionality of that and how that was expressed. I don't cry a lot in situations like that. I don't. It doesn't. It's not that something that I'm holding back. It's just not. I don't know why. It's just not one of the things. But I felt extremely heavy and whatever. But then, following that, for the next few days, when everybody else was in a very stunned state, it was like I'd already gone through that in my anticipatory grief. So I did explain to the family that I'm like, I do grieve, and don't worry if it looks different. But I've done a lot of that grieving. I've sat with a lot of those feelings and resolved a lot of that complexity prior to this moment. So if you imagine like an old, in the olden days where there wasn't therapists or hospitals or whatever, I probably would have been more useful because I would be the one now that can fetch the water, cook the meal. I can do all of that now in these early stages when everyone else is shut down. I can protect the village, I can keep a lookout because I'm in a different headspace. Now I'll come back into lower functionality at some point and then I'll come back out, but I'm on a different trajectory to everyone else. It is a good job that happens, especially in some times, because if we're all suffering together in the same time, then nobody's there to make the tea, look after us, and do the jobs. I feel very much that my trajectory, my way of processing grief, and my functionality along the trajectory of this 3 years has kind of come into its own now, and I've been allowed to see through sitting in this grief so far the value of that diversity and that diverse approach, and that it not being lesser, that it's just different, and that it's an alternative that's actually beneficial when you relate, when you judge everyone in relational terms, when you think about people as a relationship. Again, one of the reasons I'm making these videos is to be myself and share that as somebody who is living and grappling with this type of identity crisis that is being told you're autistic when you've already gone through quite a lot of life changing things and you're quite late in the day, I suppose, of character building. Characters pretty much form. I'm not saying we don't change still. I think we change all our lives, but my values and choices and family, etc. This is the first time, and I have had other people die in my life. I've had other times when it's felt like we're going to have we're facing grave danger. We've definitely had that in our lives, even with closer relatives than my father-in-law. But this is the first time that we have been in such a caring role for such a long time with somebody this close, and then they've died. So this is the first time that circle has been completed, and as such it's been a real honour, and it has really given me a lot of aha moments in terms of what the point in these videos is, why I'm doing this, and who I am. Now, the next video in this series is going to progress a little bit more into learning through grief and how I'm thinking about my sense of self and the purpose and the journey of suddenly autistic. And then I've got the final one, which is me looking at my values and actually resolving that and finally coming up with a sense of self. I really want to finish there and leave it with the feeling that, with the idea that even, I think being autistic, I'm autonomous, I'm an independent unit, I'm self focused. This is just not being narcissistic or selfish. This is the autistic. I function better on my own. Relationships cost me. They cost me a lot. That doesn't mean I don't value them. It just means I pay a high price. I'm deep in relationships. I take them very seriously. I find myself affected for a long time by relationships, and I still choose them because I'm human. I'm a person. This is part of the journey. The big difficulty I had with Brian's situation is because his behavior was taking away that opportunity for connection and relationship, and I had to mourn and grieve that, and then mourn and grieve again when he physically passed, which is easier than the emotional, than the, yeah, whatever, the conceptual, I guess. But what I'm finding so often is that the typical world seems to forget that we are society, and it seems to look at us in individual cases. And I think that's one of the reasons why I didn't want to make this vlog, just about me being autistic, because that's just me. I'm functioning in society. I have a job. I have two jobs now. I have family. I have this. I have this. I do this. I am this person to these people. It's about how I, with this autism and the ADHD and everything else, respond to life that I think is more interesting and ultimately more useful. Thank you.